Krishna Ya Putale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamine Vishnupadaya Krishna Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vasasyaya Shatarine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Shunyavadi Vasasyaya Shatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Devasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Devasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitya Gaura Hari Bo Gaura Hari Bo Hari Bo Hari Bo Nitya Gaura Hari Bo Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Gaura Hari ki jai Shri Gopal Bhatt Goswami ki jai Shri Ramchandra Kaviraj ki jai Shri Prabhupada ki jai Shri Srimad Gaura Premi Devi Dasi Hare Krishna everyone, thank you for joining us this week. We're continuing our discussions on the teachings of Lord Caitanya, and this will be chapter 25. This is the fifth part, which is the final part of this chapter. This chapter is called Personal and Impersonal Realization. Okay, we'll start with our prayers to our masters for their blessings so that we can get the correct understanding of the teachings and pastimes of Lord Caitanya. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gnananashalaakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dati Swapadantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunivari Pastrati Deshatarine. And also chant the invocation, which is verse 18 of the first chapter of Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu's biography, called the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhaktivinoda, Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhaktivinoda, Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhaktivinoda. So the translation of these verses. Glory to Sri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Sri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So the work that we're discussing from today, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, it's a book by Srila Prabhupada that's based on the biography of Lord Caitanya called the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And this chapter is discussing the particular pastimes of Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu as he instructed a Mayavadi sannyasi called Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was a very important personality at the time, especially in terms of impersonal philosophy. He was a scholar who believed basically that the ultimate understanding or realization of God is as light, formless. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu encountered Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya in Jagannath Puri, where Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was living, and where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took his residence. And there he started discussing with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya about how the Lord does indeed have a form that is light, but that the highest realization of Godhead, of the supreme absolute truth, is that of form, right? The transcendental form of Krishna, as well as the forms of all his incarnations and expansions. So we'll carry on our reading. The living entity is eternally subordinate to the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord is always great, is always the master of all energies, whereas the living entity is always under the control of the Lord's energies. So this is stated many times in the Bhagavad Gita, and we've been discussing this in the last few weeks. Being qualitatively one with the Supreme Lord, which means we have the same quality as the Lord. We have his qualities of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. This is something we also discussed in the last few weeks. The importance of our understanding is that our qualities are very tiny because we are very tiny. And the Lord has these qualities in unlimited quantities, and he's able to perform extraordinary activities with it, right? Like we described, creation comes out of his property of Sat, and his amazing pleasure potency, Srimati Radharani, is the perfection, the personification of his energy of pleasure, Ananda. All of this is way out of the capability of a living entity who only has this eternity, knowledge, and bliss in very small quantities. But still, we are of the same quality. And this is very important to our discussion. The living entity has a tendency to try and lord it over the material nature. However, being infinitesimal, very small, he is then controlled by the material nature. So simply our size counts against us, right? Krishna is so great that the material energy can never overpower him. He is the greatest, and the material nature, being one of his energies, simply exists to carry out his functions. But when we come into this world as very tiny souls with very limited power, the material energy can overpower us, right? It's just literally like the great and the small, right? The material energy is vast. As much as the material energy is subordinate to Krishna's spiritual energy, it's still much greater than we are, and therefore it overpowers us in influence. And this is why, although we come here to be controllers, we end up being servants rather, carrying out everything under the laws of material nature. Thus, the living entity is called the marginal potency of the Lord. So marginal meaning in between both. We are spiritual in nature. We just described that. We have the same qualities as Krishna. But we can either stay under the control of that supreme energy in Krishna's, the region that he lives in, his eternal spiritual planets, or we can come here and come under the control of the material nature. Right? Truly, all everything of Krishna's nature, spiritual nature, of a great spiritual nature, himself, his own expansions, his incarnations, his energies, they never come under the influence of the material nature. Also, spiritual personalities who come here to deliver us, like Srila Prabhupada, they don't come under the influence of material nature. But we can come under, the ordinary souls can come under the influence of material nature. So this margin, we're sitting on the margin between the control of the spiritual world or the material world, or the spiritual energy and material energy. That's why we're called marginal. So even this material energy is an energy of Krishna, though it appears to have no connection with Krishna. The fact that the material world doesn't appear to have a connection with the Lord is simply because we came here to escape his control. We obviously can see we can't do that because the material energy is his energy and we're still under his control. But still, because we didn't want to worship him and serve him, this material nature is conspicuous by the absence of service to him. Right? And that service to him is the spiritual energy. So without that, it's like how we described it, light and dark. Dark can only exist where light isn't. So the nature of this material world is that it is another energy of the Lord. It's simply existing where him and service to him are not directly represented. Right? But still, we're under its control, right? Meaning we're still under the control of one of his energies. It's just an energy being the opposite of him, means we're in the opposite qualities. We're no longer in an atmosphere of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. We're in an atmosphere that is temporary, miserable, and full of ignorance. And all of us have felt this. Well, we feel it all the time, actually. So we need this independence to make our choice to serve Krishna. We need this independence to choose to serve him or not to serve him. Otherwise, like we said before, there'd be no meaning to loving Krishna. The problem is the misuse of that independence gets us in the material world. Using that independence in the correct way will get us to the spiritual world. Using that independence in our true nature of service. Because the living entity can be controlled by the material nature, he cannot at any stage become one with the Supreme Lord. If the living entity were equal to the Supreme Lord, there would be no possibility of his being controlled by the material energy. So this is another very important point, because like we just established, as a marginal, tiny little source of energy, we cannot be the source of everything, right? We're very limited, right? Whereas the Supreme Lord is unlimited. Krishna therefore says, I am the source. Aham sarvasya prabhu. He is the source of everything, material and spiritual. We can't just acquire those qualities, just one day go from being... Sorry about that. We can't one day be the source of everything. Be the source of nothing like we are right now, or the source of very small, very limited qualities, very limited emanations. And then the next day become God by some process of spiritual realization, right? Nor has it been recorded in any place or anywhere that that's the case with Krishna. This is what people like to believe. They think that Krishna at some point became the Supreme, himself realized in some way and became capable of such. Okay. We can't ever believe that. Just let me know if it's better now. The sound is better. So it wasn't at any point that Krishna became God. Like, it's not recorded anywhere. Krishna doesn't state it anywhere. In fact, he is stating everywhere in the Bhagavad Gita that he's always the Supreme. And he also states that us as living entities, we've always been existing in this way and will always be existing in this way. Okay? He doesn't leave an allowance that, well, okay, at some point in the future, some of you may become self-realized and become the same as me. Right? So this is very, very important for us to understand, because people are vastly misled by the understanding that we can all become God at some point, right? And this is an impossibility for us who are so tiny, for us who do not possess at all the qualities of the Supreme Godhead. We can see the practical difference with Krishna and us. When he comes to this material world, he doesn't follow the rules like us. Right? Firstly, he's not born like an ordinary child. He's fully cognizant of his birth. He has 4 hands, a full head of hair. He's aware of who he is, what his mission is, right? Or what his parents actually have to do in order to aid him in his mission. He is fully ornamented, fully dressed. So this is not ordinary. Even when he leaves this world, he just literally just disappears. This is what he does. I mean, if you think about it logically, Krishna is one of the greatest personalities in all of Vedic history, even if you just consider him as a personality, not God. If he really did die, as some people claim, then how come there isn't some kind of memorial samadhi, something to acknowledge that? Right? Surely, if there's been these kind of places for millions or billions, even of years on this earth, there isn't any for Krishna. Right? The obvious understanding is Krishna didn't die. We have to be sensible. Krishna also killed so many demons. The best that people can come up with is that after research, a hunter after everything that Krishna was able to overcome, everyone that Krishna was ever able to overcome. So we must actually use our common sense to judge these things. That's why Sri Prabhupada said that it's very important for us to depend on common sense as well, along with our understanding of scripture, because people can distort scripture. This is something we're also going to discuss today. So Krishna he's not born, he doesn't die, he never gets old. There's absolutely there's no record, there's no image of Krishna ever being old. He doesn't ever get diseased in the same way. He doesn't suffer with ignorance. Like you said, he's born fully convinced, he leaves himself fully convinced. He's not temporary, he goes to another plane of existence for his next pastimes to commence. And full of knowledge and bliss. Krishna is always happy. This is not the case of any ordinary being. So how can we go from being completely opposite to the qualities of Krishna and in the quantities and the ways that we express it to being on the same level of Krishna? And this is just not possible. It's just a way that people try to explain their own beliefs. That we can all become God, we can all become the Supreme at some point. It's just not possible. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, sorry about the sound here, I don't know what's going on. This was okay. Would it be better if I tried to take out the mic?
Yes, it's much louder.
Okay, I think maybe it's the mic. Okay, let me leave it now. Okay, so we'll carry on reading. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text 5, the living entity is described as one of the energies of the Supreme Lord. Although inseparable from the energetic, energy is still energy, and it cannot be equal with the energetic. Okay, we've also used another example throughout our classes that I have an energy to lift something with my hand, but that energy is not me. At the same time, it's an integral part of me such that it can be considered me, but that power doesn't equal all my other powers. The power to lift doesn't equal my power to be cognizant, my power to digest food, my power to see, right? So in the same way, we as living beings, we are part of Krishna's energies. We're a part of him in that way, right? We can consider that actually everything in existence is a part of Krishna, still resting on him, drawing from him, almost like how little appliances draw from a great current. Okay. And in that way, we're all connected to him, but we're not him at the same time because we can't be that total current and we can't actually power anything else or use those powers for anything extraordinary like Krishna can. So this is called the simultaneous one and difference. So in other words, the living entity is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord. Part of him,
right? And different from him. And because it's hard for us to understand, this philosophy is called the inconceivable oneness and difference. Achintya means inconceivable, and Bed Abed. One, Bed Abed, one and different at the same time. The Bhagavad Gita 7.4 to 5 clearly states that earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego are the 8 elementary energies of the Supreme Lord and are of inferior energy, whereas the living entity is an energy of superior quality. So we said in the beginning we have qualities of Krishna, the same eternity, knowledge, and bliss that we discussed so extensively in the last 2 weeks. We have that, small amounts. But still, the fact that we are made of that spiritual energy means that we're just not the same as this material world. We only think we are when we're living in these bodies. But as Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita in this verse that Prabhupada has quoted, these elements of this material world are of the inferior quality. And in the next verse, he says we are of the superior quality. So with us understanding that, it means that we have to try and get to that spiritual atmosphere where we can come back into contact with the qualities that we are really made of, that eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And the way that we get to that is through devotional service to the Lord. The Vedic instructions confirm that the transcendental form of the Supreme Lord is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. The impersonalist conception of the Lord's form, however, is just the opposite, for they say that it is a transformation of the material modes of nature. So people who believe in the formless divine, they don't allow for any kind of divine form, right, like Krishna's. So the only way they can explain Krishna's form is to say that he's another product of material nature, just like our forms are products of material nature. So we said already, Krishna's forms, they don't have the same properties as us, right? They're not temporary, ignorant, and miserable. Krishna's forms also defy birth, death, old age, and disease. Krishna's forms do amazing things, like lifting Govardhan Hill, like killing these gigantic and extraordinary demons, right? And so many other things that Krishna's forms can do. This is why the Vedic scriptures that we've also discussed in the last few weeks are telling us about the transcendental nature of God, right? The transcendental nature of his form. So how come these people can't accept it? Well, Krishna says in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Avajananti Mamuda, Manushim Tanam Ashritam, Param Bhavam, Ajananta Mama Bhuta Maheshwaram. Fools, this is what he says, fools deride me when I descend in the human form. Simply, these people are foolish, right? They're in ignorance and they just can't accept this transcendental form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. Right? And Prabhupada gives the word for word translation, so it's not that there's any way to misunderstand this. The Lord uses the word mudha, avajananti ma mudha, and mudha is foolish men. Manushim in a human form, Krishna's human-like form. It's like a human, but it's not of the same qualities as a human. Right? The Lord Ashritam assumes this, but still he is Param, transcendental, Param Bhavam, Param Bhavam Ajananto. They don't know. Ajananto means to not know. They don't know his transcendental nature. Right? Mama, Mai, of everything that be. Bhuta Maheshwaram. Right? That is him. So this is very interesting, actually, because as I was reading the other day, that Srila Jiva Goswami explains that Krishna's direct names, like Krishna and Narayan, are like how we have in the first pronoun, but his descriptive names, like Maheshwar, he actually shares it with other great personalities like Lord Shiva. But it is a name of quality, right? Because Maheshwar means the supreme protector, Maheshwar, supreme proprietor, supreme master. So it's more of a descriptive quality, and therefore it can be, as the Lord has done, shared it. But it is a name of his, right? Being a descriptive name, and therefore we have these names being used here. He also uses the name in the 5th chapter, right? Maheshwaram. So it's definitively referring to him and no other personality. He is the actual supreme proprietor. Actually, the form of the Supreme Lord is beyond the modes of material nature, and thus is not like the forms of the material world. His form is fully spiritual and cannot be compared with any material form. Anyone who does not accept the spiritual form of the Supreme Lord is counted among the atheists. So now we're hearing that these people are not just foolish, as Krishna says, but Prabhupada says they're also atheistic. Okay, so what if they claim to believe in a supreme? After all, they say that the supreme is formless. It does mean they believe in one, right? But if we take the logic, some example that we used previously as well, that if I say, or if we claim that everybody is equal to each other, there's no superior and there's no inferior, then it means that even if we call ourselves or try to imagine ourselves as the supreme in some way, like as people could say, we become God. There's actually no meaning to that, right? Because God is a relative position. God is supreme in relation to all of us. Just like for a king to be a king over his citizens, he has to have absolute power. If everyone else has the same power as him, what makes him a king? So you can't have many kings, because equally it means no one's a king. No one has the powers. Everybody's the same. There's no one who has greater power than anyone else. So in the same way, if we say that everyone is God, like these impersonalists say, equally it means no one is God. So essentially it means they don't believe in God, and that makes them atheists. This is what people don't understand. When you claim that every one of us can be God, you're actually propounding atheism. Because Lord Buddha did not accept these Vedic principles, the Vedic teachers consider him an atheist. So we're not deriding Lord Buddha in any way, because he's actually an incarnation of Krishna. But he was an incarnation with a specific mission. That Srimad Bhagavatam says all the Lord's incarnations have a mission. And his mission was to stop animal killing, which was being done using the Vedas as an excuse. So if you want to stop rituals that are done in the Vedas, then you have to actually you have to reject the Vedas. Right? That's what he had to do. In order to stop people using the Vedic rituals to kill animals, he had to stop the rituals by telling them not to believe in the Vedas anymore. So the Vedas are actually describing God and the teachings of God. And so in Buddhism, we see without any Vedas, any teachings about God, there is actually no supreme God. There's many great personalities, there's goddesses, there's teachers, right? But there isn't actually a supreme God. And so in Buddhism, the ultimate understanding is that an enlightened soul actually ceases to exist. An enlightened soul leaves this world of birth and death, but then they just stop existing. There's no real soul. There's just a stream of consciousness that becomes void after someone passing away. Although Mayavadi philosophers pretend to accept the Vedic principles, because they do not accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they indirectly preach Buddhist philosophy or atheistic philosophy. So we've read enough now to see that the Mayavad philosophy that rejects the form of God actually rejects the Vedas, because the Vedas are teaching about the form of God. So in a way, the Mayavad philosophy is also rejecting the Vedas like the Buddhists reject the Vedas. And so this is why they're also considered atheist. Mayavadi philosophy is inferior to Buddhist philosophy, though. Okay, this is an interesting statement, which directly denies Vedic authority. Because Mayavad philosophy is disguised as Vedanta philosophy, which means disguised as Vedic philosophy, it's more dangerous than Buddhism or atheism. So this is very interesting, because you'd rather have a Buddhist philosophy that outright says that God doesn't exist or doesn't have a form. And then if one wants to look into it, then one can research the Vedas, and one may actually come to the correct understanding that God has a form. But with Mayavad philosophy presenting the Vedas according to its own philosophy and directly denying the form of the Lord, then it means that one's research, one's interest stops there, right? One will think that thanks to Mayavad philosophy, one already has the understanding of the Vedas, so one won't look any further, and one will then reject the form of the Lord, believing that that's what the Vedas states. Right? Whereas with Buddhism, one will understand that, there's a possibility that the Vedas believes in form, because the Buddhism doesn't talk about it. Okay, so therefore Buddhism is actually a little safer, we could say, than Mayavad philosophy. The only reason Vyasadeva compiled the Vedanta Sutra, right? We've explained before, Vedanta Sutra is based on the Vedas. was so that all living entities could benefit from it by understanding the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga. Because the Vedanta Sutra, we also explained this in the previous chapter, it actually discusses the form of the Lord so that we can come to the understanding of service to the Lord. When we know that the Lord has form, then we also it gives meaning to devotional service. If you don't have a form, then there's no meaning to service. So the Vedanta Sutra starts already speaking right from the beginning about God as a controller, God as a person, and builds us up to rendering service to him. Unfortunately, the Mayavadi philosophy, the Shararika Bhashya, has practically defeated the purpose of the Vedanta Sutra, right? Because this commentary on the Vedanta has presented the teachings of the Vedanta as only about the formless divine, and of course that obviates devotional service. There's no service that you can actually do. There's no relationship of love with the formless divine. In the Mayavadi commentary, the spiritual transcendental form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead has been denied, and of course with it devotional service. And the Supreme Brahman is being dragged down to the level of the individual Brahman, the living entity. And so this is actually what's happened. Instead of extolling the formless divine, right, the Supreme Brahman, both the Supreme Brahman and the impersonal Brahman. Supreme Brahman is Krishna and impersonal Brahman is the light around him. The people have brought him down, have brought him and his form of light. They brought it down to the level of us. That's a little bit insulting. It's quite offensive. And this is the reason why Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu was very much against this philosophy, because it's offensive, right? We can imagine if we meet some great person, right, prime minister or a president, and we just like treat them on an equal level and act like we're the same as them, right, that we should have the same privileges and the same respect. They'd be very insulted. But we're doing this to God all the time when we believe that we can be one with him. Right? So this is actually it's a very offensive mentality. Both the Supreme Brahman, that's Krishna, and the individual Brahman, that's us, have been denied spiritual form and individuality. Although it is clearly stated that the Supreme Lord is the one supreme living entity, and the other living entities are many subordinate living entities. Right? So they're trying to say that we're all actually one, like one big mass of energy, and form doesn't exist. Yet at the same time, the Upanishads, which are very much Vedic scriptures, in which they very much accept, are saying Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. There's one eternal being who is supporting everyone else, and there's many little eternal beings who are being supported by that one being, right? As well as Krishna himself saying, Natva Ivaham Jatu Nasham, Natvam Neme Janadipaha, Nachaiva Navish. Nachaiva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayam ataha param. Krishna tells Arjuna that all the people assembled on that battlefield, all the kings, they were always existing. They were always existing as individuals. Nobody was one big mass of God energy and then kind of fell to this world. And they were all individuals before, and they will always be individuals in future. As Krishna says, he himself, Krishna, was an individual, Arjuna was an individual, and they will also always be individuals in future. Thus, reading the Mayavadi commentaries in the Vedanta Sutra is always dangerous. This is important for us to understand. The danger is that through these commentaries, one may come to falsely equate the living entity with the Supreme Lord. In this way, a conditioned living entity can be falsely directed, and then he can never come to his actual position of eternal activity in Bhakti Yoga or devotional service. In other words, the Mayavadi philosophers have rendered the greatest disservice to humanity by promoting the impersonal view of the Supreme Lord, and thus depriving human society of the real message of the Vedanta Sutra. Right? And this is the great tragedy. From the very beginning of the Vedanta Sutra, it is accepted that the cosmic manifestation is a display of the Supreme Lord's energy. The aphorism, and we explained that aphorisms are short little verses. The aphorism Janmari Asiyataha, which is the second verse of the Vedanta Sutra, right, describes the Supreme Brahman as he from whom everything emanates, right? It calls it's a he, it's a person, okay, from whom everything comes. The same thing that Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. He by whom everything is maintained, and he into whom everything is dissolved. Thus, the absolute truth is the cause of creation, maintenance, and dissolution. This is a very nice analogy that Srila Prabhupada gives now. Which Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu gave. The cause of a fruit is the tree. But when a tree produces a fruit, one cannot say that the tree is impersonal or that it vanishes, right? After the tree is given fruit and the fruit is there, does the tree just cease to exist, just disappear into thin air? Of course not. It's still there, and it's still giving rise to more fruit, okay? The tree may produce hundreds and thousands of fruits, but it remains as it is. The fruit is produced, then it develops, stays for some time, dwindles, and finally vanishes. This does not mean that the tree also vanishes. Thus, from the very beginning, the Vedanta Sutra explains the doctrine of byproducts. That God, the supreme absolute truth, right, can produce byproducts. The byproducts, right, can be transformed in energy so that they don't have the same qualities as God. So it's not that God is producing little gods, right? He's transforming his energy to produce other energies, either his direct spiritual energies like Srimati Radharani, us tiny little energies, or the energy of the material world, which is indirect. Right? Material world is an energy that exists where Krishna isn't. And this is actually the philosophy of Vedanta. That's why it starts with describing creation, because that's the point where everything or all energies come from God. The activities of production, maintenance, and dissolution are carried out by the inconceivable energy of the Lord. Thus, the cosmic manifestation is a transformation of the energy of the Supreme Lord. Although the energy of the Supreme Lord and the Supreme Lord himself are non-different and inseparable. So it seems, right, like we're all, it seems, although we are the energy of the Lord, transformed from him, we actually are non-different from him, as we already explained, especially the living entities who are of the same transcendental quality of him. Technically, we're inseparable from him. We're all resting on his energy, like Krishna gives a very nice example in the Bhagavad Gita, like the wind is resting on the sky. We can't say that the wind and the sky are the same, yet at the same time they're inseparable. So right now, all of us are actually existing on Krishna's energy, like we're one continuum of that energy, the same way appliances are plugged into one great transformer, and it seems like they're in one continuum of the energy. Yet the little appliance is very different from the great transformer. And so this is actually how we are one with the Lord. It's not an absolute oneness where we're the same as him. There's quite a difference. Again, this is called Achintya Bheda Bhed Tattva, same and different at the same time. A touchstone may produce great quantities of gold in contact with iron, but still the touchstone remains as it is. So God may produce so many things, but he still remains as he is. Similarly, the Supreme Lord, despite his producing the huge material cosmic manifestation, always remains in his transcendental form. It's not to say when Krishna creates everything, there's some part of his energy that's like cut off him, right? That doesn't exist in him anymore. It's now something else, this big world, all the little living beings, right? It doesn't work like that. Because we're in one continuum, technically we're all still one with him. But at the same time, his energy is so unlimited that even if he produces so much of us and so much of this material manifestation, he's still the same. And how do we know this? The Vedas tell us. Specifically, the first verse, very famous verse of Ishopanishad, the Isha Upanishad. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachite Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. And the translation is, the personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. And because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. So he's whole, everything that comes from him is also whole, like all of us, whole, complete beings. Whatever is produced of the complete whole is also complete in itself. Because he is the complete whole, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. Right? Overall, everything is him, so nothing has changed. Right? That transformation of energy is still connected to him. He's still the complete balance. This is the doctrine of byproducts, that the Supreme Lord can produce byproducts and still be unchanged and whole, substantiated by the Upanishad. The Mayavadi philosophers have the audacity to reject the purport of what Vyasadeva explained in the Vedanta Sutra. And they try to say he attempted to establish a doctrine of transformation of the Supreme. What they're trying to say is, instead of the energy of the Lord being transformed into something else, us in the material manifestation, they're trying to say that God himself becomes changed when things emanate from him. right? Which is again going against what we've just read in the Upanishads, but this is why we say that they don't explain things according to the Vedas. And they're trying to say that if God is going to create everything, including us, and he's going to be changed, it means it cannot be the absolute truth. Because for something to be absolute as truth, it must never change, right? And absolute truth must never become untrue at some point. So the absolute truth has to stay the same. And the only way they can explain it is that God can't create anything. So what does it mean? It means, according to them, this entire material manifestation is just an illusion, just a figment of everyone's imagination. And basically, we're all still the same one with the Supreme. And we know that that's totally unbelievable. But this is actually how they try to explain away the things that Srila Vyasadeva wrote in the Vedanta Sutra. According to the Mayavadi philosophy, the cosmic manifestation is an illusory transformation of the absolute truth, which has no separate existence outside the cosmic manifestation. This is not the message of the Vedanta Sutra. The cosmic manifestation has been explained by Mayavadi philosophers as false, but it's false. It's just temporary. Right? We are living in this world right now. We have bodies made of it. How are we not real, right? How is this not real? This is not, we are not holograms, right? We're not, right? Some figment of anyone's imagination, especially not our own. And we're existing. But what we understand is that this world is temporary. That's the illusion. The illusion is when I think it's eternal, that I can live here eternally. And when I try to live here eternally, right? We know about all those people who try to search after the fountain of youth and the nectar of immortality and all kinds of things. It's an illusion if I think I belong here, right? That I am these bodies and that this is my home. And that's a real illusion. And that is why this world is called Maya. It's called that which is not me. I'm not a part of this. It doesn't mean that this world doesn't exist. This is how they've interpreted Maya. That which is not, for them, that which is not existing. But it's very much existing. We're all proof of that. The Mayavadi philosophers maintain that the absolute truth is the only truth, and that the material manifestation known as the world is false. Actually, this is not so. The material manifestation is not false. It is truth, but because it is relative truth, it is temporary. So we're discussing absolute and relative. Krishna and Krishna's world is always true. It's always existing. It's always there. It doesn't get changed the way the material world changes, right? The way everything here decays and then is destroyed, right? That doesn't happen in the spiritual world. Therefore, it's absolute. But still, the material world is true in some sense because it's a reflection of the spiritual world. That makes it a relative truth, right? It's relative to the spiritual world, that it's a reflection. Therefore, it has the same appearance as the spiritual world, right? It has trees and lakes and all kinds of things, but it is temporary. It will come to an end, right? And this is also reflected in the fact that the qualities here are opposite to the spiritual world, just like a reflection in a mirror, right? As we've said many times before, temporary, ignorant, and miserable. This is what happens when Krishna is not here. So not only have the impersonalists gone and distorted this whole meaning of the Vedas, but they've also distorted something very important in the Vedas. It's the essential and what we call principal verse. Right? That is the sound, Omkar. Omkar is the sound form of the Lord. It's actually primordial sound. It's a sound that everything comes from. Srimad Bhagavatam explains that sound is the first thing in the entire creation. And from sound, all the other elements develop. Right? So sound is actually the representation of God that creates everything, because God is powerful enough to be present in sound and able to actually manifest everything that exists from this sound. Right? Srimad Bhagavatam therefore makes a very important point, that just how this material world comes from sound, our connection with this world can also be dissolved by sound, right? So the primordial and transcendental sound, Omkar, is now present in this age as a Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And it's the sound that liberates, right? That can get us out of the material world, simply because it's of the same property as Omkar. It is the Lord in sound form. Pranava Omkara is the chief sound vibration found in the Vedic hymns, and it is considered to be the sound form of the Supreme Lord. From Omkar, all Vedic hymns have emanated, and the world itself has also emanated from this Omkar sound. The vibration Tattvamasi, also found in the Vedic hymns, is not the chief vibration, but is an explanation of the constitutional position of the living entity. Tattvamasi is very, very common, and it's used by the impersonalists a lot because it means you are that too. But we've also explained that we may be that. We are part of the energy, right? Being eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. But we're also different because we're tiny energies. So Tattvamasi by itself is not a complete statement of who we are. It's not a complete doctrine like Lord Caitanya has given us, Achintya Beda Bed Tattva, saying we are one and different also. It's only saying you are that too. And it's been taken out of context, right, for people to basically believe that they are that God also. Tattvamasi means that the living entity is a spiritual particle of the Supreme Spirit. But this is not the chief motive of the Vedanta Sutra of the or the Vedic literature. The chief motive, the chief sound representation of the Supreme is Omkar. So you simply cannot compare Omkar and Tattvamasi. They're both in the Vedas, but one is a sound representation of God, and one is a partial statement of reality. Right? So we see the difference. This is another distortion. So if you take the whole Vedas in this word Tattvamasi, you're only going to get a partial understanding of the living entity, and you're not going to get a complete understanding of God at all. But we see in Omkar, we have everything. We have God himself, and with God is, well, everything, right? Even his energies, us, our spiritual masters have given us this understanding that Omkara, which is the same as Om, A-U-M, right, stands for the Lord, Srimati Radharani, and all of us, right? The Lord and his energies. This is a statement of scripture. We said that the whole Vedas is actually explaining God and his energies, just like the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Tattvamasi doesn't contain all of that. Right? It just can't. So we cannot at all say that the two are equal, nor that Tattvamasi can ever be the principal verse of the Vedas. All these faulty explanations of the Vedanta Sutra are considered atheistic. Because the Mayavadi philosophers do not accept the eternal, transcendental form of the Supreme Lord, they are unable to engage in real devotional service. Thus, the Mayavadi philosophy is forever bereft of Krishna consciousness and Krishna's devotional service. And so this is a reality. Just like everybody else that they mislead to not believe in God's form, they also don't believe in that form, so they also will not ever take to devotional service. Devotional service is based on the Lord's form. If they don't develop the nature of service, they can't enter into the spiritual world, because the spiritual world is composed of devotional service. It's of the energy, the spiritual energy of service to God. So it means that we're forever condemned to rotating in this material world. At the basis of the material world is a false ego. The false ego is the reason why we're all here. We all believe that we're controllers. We're all trying to be controllers of material energy. And wanting to be God is also in the false ego, right? It's also in wanting to be a controller of the material world. Even if it is just to escape the material world, it's not at all in the attitude of service, right? Service is the complete opposite to false ego. It's absolute humility versus the false ego, which is absolute control. Sorry, yes, the false ego is absolute control. And this idea to want to be God is wanting to have absolute control. What greater state of control can you get than being God? So even though people aim for transcendence, this is the irony. They're aiming for transcendence and spirituality by trying to become one with God or being God, but they get the opposite. They stay in the material world in the false ego continuously. It's only by wanting to become a service of God that you actually get to transcendence, that you actually get out of the material world and you actually get to the spiritual world, right, where transcendence exists, right? Transcendence exists in service to God. And so, of course, we know that they also become atheistic by that. And any power that they get by their spiritual endeavors, it actually increases their false ego even more. It traps them even more in this material world. Jai Sachinandan Prabhu was saying yesterday, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It happens in small ways. Anytime somebody becomes a leader, somebody becomes president, somebody becomes a minister, and it happens in the sense of religion as well. And as soon as people get great powers, they being in the false ego, it corrupts them. There's no other way to defeat the false ego but becoming a servant of God. And then one can be free of the influence of material energy. Then one can actually achieve true spiritual power by being a servant of God. The pure devotee of the personality of Godhead never accepts the Mayavad philosophy as an actual path to transcendental realization. Right? We never think becoming one with God is the way to become transcendental. The Mayavadi philosophers hover in the moral and immoral material atmosphere of the cosmic world and are thus always engaged in rejecting and accepting material enjoyment. Right? They have falsely accepted the non-spiritual as the spiritual, and trying to become one with God as being spiritual. And as a result, they have forgotten the eternal spiritual form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as well as his names, qualities, and entourage. And they don't believe in any of it, because if they reject the form of Krishna, they reject everything that goes with it. Those persons, those transcendental persons like Srimati Radharani, the names of God, right? That's why they can't chant the Maha Mantra. His qualities, because they consider it all connected to his form, and they think his form is Maya, right? Like ours. They consider the transcendental pastimes, name, form, and qualities of the Supreme to be products of material nature. Because of their acceptance and rejection of material pleasure and misery, the Mayavadi philosophers are eternally subjected to material misery. The actual devotees of the Lord are always in disagreement with Mayavadi philosophers. Impersonalism cannot possibly represent eternity, bliss, and knowledge. Being situated in imperfect knowledge of liberation, right? Because we said they can never actually be liberated. They can never get to the spiritual world. The Mayavadis decry the eternity, knowledge, and bliss of the devotees as materialism. Because they reject devotional service, they are unintelligent. Right? Krishna himself called them fools. And unable to understand the effects of devotional service. Generally, they think it's a bit inferior to the cultivation of knowledge, which is what they are engaged in. But Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, right, he makes it very clear in the 10th chapter that if you're constantly engaging in his devotional service, then Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, he'll give you the understanding. That means the correct philosophical understanding to get to him. This is his promise. Right? So constant devotional service is not an inferior position to anything else. Not to mystic yoga, meditation, right, which people think is very important, powerful, advanced, and not the study of the Vedas, right? People can become Vedic scholars, they can quote Sanskrit verses nicely and be impressive, but they will not get the understanding to come to Krishna, to get to real liberation, actually. The word jugglery that they use in an attempt to amalgamate knowledge, right? Word jugglery, Prabhupada describes this many times. They just know the Sanskrit very well, so they can interpret the verses of the Vedas very well. The word jugglery they use in an attempt to amalgamate knowledge, the knowable and the knower, like trying to put it all together. They were all the same, the knowable and the knower, God and us are one. Simply proves that they are unintelligent, right? So us, we're not great scholars. We've been debunking all of these arguments for the last few weeks, right? This is a knowledge that's coming from Krishna. It's coming from within because of our devotional service to him, so that we can actually understand things. Whereas they may be great scholars, but they're pretty unintelligent fools, even by Krishna's description. The doctrine of byproducts is the real purport of the beginning of Vedanta Sutra. The Lord possesses innumerable, unlimited energies, and he displays the byproducts of these energies in different ways. So all Krishna's energies we've been describing, Satchit and Ananda, us, the material world, Krishna can display all his energies in so many wonderful, wonderful ways. Everything is under his control. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is also the Supreme Controller, and he is manifested in innumerable energies and expansions. And we finally end this wonderful chapter. Right? There's been a lot of knowledge, philosophy. I hope it's all been clear, and I thank you all for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki. Okay. Are there any questions or comments or anything I can try and clarify? I must apologize. Thursday is a little bit challenging because we're going to have load shedding in this area in a few minutes. So if we don't get to complete the class, you can always post your questions on the group as well, and or comments, and I can get to them when the Wi-Fi is back on. If there aren't any, then we'll just glorify two great Vaishnavas very quickly. So yesterday was the appearance of Srila Gopal Bhat Goswami. Gopal Bhat Goswami was a very great follower of Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu. He's actually one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. And these personalities are actually the reason why we're all here. Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu, some say that he recorded 8 verses, some say that he spoke those verses and they were recorded by his associates. But other than these 8 verses, Lord Caitanya didn't directly give us any instruction. And it's very interesting because the Lord always speaks philosophy in all his appearances. Even as Krishna, he spoke the Bhagavad Gita. But Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu gave his philosophical teachings to his direct disciples, right? And those were, of course, Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatana Goswami, as well as his secretary, Sarup Damodar Goswami. He recorded a lot of the Lord's teachings. And through him, great devotees like Raghunath Das Goswami learned these. So in principle, our principal acharyas, Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Sanatana Goswami, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami, they actually wrote down most of the Lord's teachings. And then Gopal Bhat Goswami, he appeared in South India in a very, very spiritually elevated family who were followers of Vaishnava Sampradaya. He eventually, after having the association with Lord Caitanya as a child, he eventually also went to Vrindavan and joined the 6 Goswamis and began recording the philosophies that Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu had given us. And then we know Srila Jiva Goswami, who is the nephew of Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis. He then learned from Rupa Goswami. Rupa Goswami is one of his spiritual masters. He learned from him the philosophies of Lord Caitanya, and he also produced a huge, prodigious amount of literature. So from all these Goswamis, we have the most extraordinary amount of spiritual literature based in bhakti. So a lot of people may think these are like modern expositions, and they believe generally the Vedas are a little more authentic, you could say. But these are the teachings of the same Supreme Lord who gave us the Vedas. They're adapted to our time, and they're giving us something that was never given before, even in the Vedas. They're giving pure love of Krishna. And that's why these bhakti scriptures, they're very unique and they're very precious, because they're actually directly addressing bhakti, the highest relationship we can have with God. So these wonderful Goswamis, they were essential to us having these teachings of Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu. And through them, all these teachings being put into writing were spread all over India. Srila Gopal Bhat Goswami became the spiritual master of Srinivas Acharya, Srila Srinivas Acharya. He was one of the next generation after the Goswamis that spread the literature all over East and the East India, right, Bengal, and as well as Orissa. And from there, of course, it spread everywhere else. Right, and many other great teachers appeared in those areas, especially in Bengal area, like Srila Prabhupada. And they learned about these teachings as well so that they could give them to the rest of the world. And yesterday was also the disappearance of Ramachandra Kaviraj. He's a disciple of Srinivas Acharya, and he is an associate, a very dear friend of Sri Narottam Das Thakur. Also, my wife, so